Good day to all the participants of our monthly seminar. I was tasked to speak about giving feedback, and while I was preparing my presentation, I realized that giving feedback is as crucial as receiving feedback. So, in my presentation, I will attempt to discuss both giving and receiving feedback. I know it's hard because despite good intentions, we've hurt others and we've been discouraged by others because we know that words are really powerful. So I added the word art because indeed for me, feedback giving and receiving is an art. There is an artistic or maybe better way of doing both so that we achieve the goal or the goals of giving and receiving feedback and further achieve the intended outcomes of learning and even our relationships. Let me just do a quick review of the various topics that we had in our monthly seminars since January. Please note that these topics are related to each other. In January, Dr. Nemuel S. Fahutagana discussed overview of authentic assessment. This was followed by Dr. Erlyn Sana's presentation on the Health System Science Framework Assessment in Health Professions Education. And in May of 2022, Dr. Maria Elizabeth M. Grajeda discussed constructing rubrics. And last July, the assessment of clinical skills were shared to us by our Dean, Dr. Melflor A. Atienza. And today, I'm going to discuss about the art of giving and receiving feedback. At the end of the session, you, the participants, hopefully shall be able to first explain giving feedback as an important form of assessing the teaching learning process and in improving relationships among health professions educators, to be able to demonstrate basic skills in giving and receiving feedback, and be able to apply selected feedback models in real life experiences in the classroom, in the hospitals or clinics, and in the health professions education organizations. Do you agree with Ken Blanchard with what he said that feedback is the breakfast of champions? He believed that it is the most cost-effective strategy in improving performance, be it in the classroom or even in our own organizations. Since breakfast is the most important meal of the day, we should also give feedback importance so that as health professions educators, we can assist our students, our interns, our trainees or learners in general to achieve optimum performance. To provide a brief historical overview, we will start from the early 20th century and consider Thorndike's law of effect, which states that behaviors that lead to satisfying outcomes are likely to be repeated, whereas behaviors that lead to undesired outcomes are less likely to recur. Skinner and behaviorism, with positive and negative reinforcements and punishments, can also be considered as precursors to what the field currently views as instructional feedback. Further, the value of formative assessment by Bloom, in which he described the benefits of offering students regular feedback on their learning through classroom formative assessments. Bloom described specific strategies teachers could use to implement formative assessments as part of regular classroom instruction, both to improve student learning, to reduce gaps in the achievement of different subgroups of students, and to help teachers to adjust their instruction. Given that short historical overview, allow me now to discuss the meaning of feedback in the context of communication in general. Feedback refers to the response or reaction of receiver to the sender's message. Feedback is the essence of communication and is the final step of communication process. Without feedback from the receiver, communication process remains incomplete. This feedback may be an oral or written message, or action, or simply silence. Transmitting or sending message is half of the communication process. When messages reach the receiver, he decodes the message and sends his response to the sender to complete the communication process. Feedback enables the sender to evaluate the effectiveness of his message. If the receiver does not understand what the sender wants to convey, then the sender refines or repeats the message. Furthermore, in the definition of Miser, feedback points to four important goals. First, to describe students' performance. Second, a process of helping students address their performance. Third, identify areas for improvement. And fourth, tips for improvement or performing better. Jackson offers similar definition of feedback in the context of assessment. He mentions the following as important elements of the feedback process as a form of assessment. These are: first, where the learner is vis-a-vis expected learning outcomes. Second, where the learner needs to get there, or what the learner needs to get there rather. Third, what learning opportunities are needed to ensure growth. And third, how to help learners so that they get better at learning. As explained in the earlier slide, feedback is not a one-way process. It is a mutual engagement between the giver and the receiver of the feedback. This is an engagement between the teacher and the learner, among learners, within the learner himself or herself, and between a learner and a teacher. In the health professions, your patients and anyone working with you as a member of the multidisciplinary team can give you feedback. Feedback in these cases is meant to be given reciprocally. That is, you will also need to give feedback to your peers. Educational or clinical supervisors are considered the major source of feedback. They act as mentors who monitor the clinical and educational progress of the learners. Trainees' feedback is essential to monitor and improve the quality of specialty training programs, and learning opportunities. Peers and colleagues' feedback as a multidisciplinary or interprofessional team are expected to be open and supportive to further improve the teaching and learning environment. Patients' feedback as well as patients' feedback rather is also significant because they are the end users or receivers of the service that health professionals offer them, and they are the best source of assessment as to the functionality and quality of the service health professionals give them. As we all know, there are positive or constructive and negative feedback or code criticisms. Obviously, positive feedback is directed towards the strengths of the learners, while negative feedback are directed towards the weaknesses of the learners. The former leading to optimum performance, while the latter may lead to frustration and disappointment and demoralization. Aside from being positive and negative, feedback can also be given in various methods. It can be briefly given on a daily basis, formally during a specific time, and during major points in a clinical rotation for purposes of improvement before the end of the rotation. Feedback, depending on how it is given, may lead to the success or failure of the learners. Kramer and Kowach in their article explain the effect of feedback according to the social cognitive theory. The success of feedback lead to the increase of self-efficacy and performance, while the failure of feedback leads to the decrease of self-efficacy and performance. Lefroy and colleagues came up with 32 guidelines on the do's, don'ts, and don't knows of feedback in clinical education. As a summary, they came up with this diagram. Trainees are looking for information about their performance and motivation to be or aim to be exemplary clinicians. The feedback process is incomplete if it does not result in the generation of strategies for improvement, either recommendations or self-generated as a result of feedback. And the best feedback process loops back into a subsequent assessment with feedback about whether this has resulted in improved clinical performance. These processes and outcomes will flourish in the supportive learning culture of systematic dialogic feedback. The student feedback interaction model shows that the context must be taken into consideration in giving feedback. These are the sources of feedback, current performance, and learning outcomes. The model emphasizes the three types of student processing: cognitive, affective, and behavioral. The model shows that message, student characteristics, and cognitive, affective, and behavioral responses contribute to an action that may alter student performance and learning. The model emphasized three questions important for student receptivity of feedback. Do I understand feedback? How do I feel about feedback? What am I going to do about feedback? Importantly, the authors suggest that all feedback that comes from any external source will have to be internalized and converted into self or inner feedback. The efficacy of this internal feedback would vary depending on a variety of factors. The Medical Education Unit of the National Academy of Medical Sciences has identified the principles which should be followed while giving constructive feedback. These are called the ABCDEFGIS, and these are the following: amount of information, benefit to the trainees, change behavior, descriptive language, environment, focused, group check, interpretation check, and sharing information. The following principles will be discussed further in our succeeding slides. Lara and her colleagues, in their article, Effective Feedback in the Education of Health Professionals, enumerated the characteristics of effective feedback and some suggested application in health professions education. First, creating an accepting environment by being non-judgmental and explaining to students that feedback is part of learning. Second, focusing on behaviors that can be changed or improved and on observations. And third, feedback must be focused on learning goals and performance on tasks. Fourth, feedback should be made on the basis of competencies required. And fifth, ideally, feedback must be given immediately after clinical interactions or after student activity. But in more serious cases, feedback may be delayed. We'll be discussing this a little later. Then number 6, consider the readiness and absorption capacity of the person receiving the feedback or the student. Too much feedback may be overwhelming and defeats the purpose of the feedback. Kaya dapat agad-agad ibinibigay yung feedback para hindi naiipon. Dahil kapag naipon, baka hindi rin kayang i-digest ng learner or ng estudyante. And number 7, allow the student to learn from the experience and let him or her reflect on them. Just provide some guide questions for reflection. This will create a more encouraging and motivating environment. And lastly, and as earlier mentioned, the teacher is also a receiver of feedback. So you may solicit feedback from your learners. This is for you, the giver of feedback, to further improve in the art of giving and receiving feedback. As Haiti says, feedback is one of the most powerful influences on learning and achievement if you get it right. Haiti defines 4 levels of feedback. Each of these levels can be effective at certain learning moments, but also, remember, detrimental at the wrong time. The 4 levels are not hierarchical. The task level is the most common type of feedback given. It tells how well the learner has performed a specific task. Task feedback can be effective when distinguishing correct from incorrect answers, or in acquiring more or different information, in building more surface knowledge, and addressing interpretations such as what must be corrected for a specific project. Some sample prompts under task level can be seen on the screen. Process level feedback is specific to the processes used for tasks, such as how information is obtained and how the task is connected to relating tasks. It challenges the student to form a deeper understanding of the learning and encourages him to construct meaning on his own. It provides information about connections between ideas, strategies for identifying errors, and cues about how to fix up strategies. The power of feedback at this level is that it promotes error detection, which when a student reflects on or on his own work, no, he needs it when he reflects on his own work. Some delay in providing this type of feedback is useful. You may refer to the sample prompts on the screen. Self-regulation level addresses the way that the learner examines and adjusts his actions toward his learning goal. Much like the process level, it encourages the learner to self-assess. But to a more critical degree, no, it also prompts him to engage with the feedback, requiring commitment, control, and confidence. A learner that is not confident in his own abilities or is not as effective a learner, someone who is not willing to invest the time or effort seeking feedback, not willing to seek further information or help, or not being able to review work, definitely will not benefit from this type of feedback. So again, some sample prompts are again given on the screen. The last is self-level of feedback. This focuses more on the person than on the work and is the least effective. It typically builds a student up, but gives them little information for improvement. Comments from the teacher, no, such as great work, nice job, you did a good job, or MC's a good student, no, may actually be counterproductive and interfere with the student's ability to self-assess. We should refrain from using this level of feedback unless it is linked to effort, self-regulation, or engagement to comfort and support a struggling student. Haiti and Timperley's feedback model emphasizes that the purpose of feedback is to reduce discrepancy between current performance and the desired goal. The discrepancy can be reduced by both the teacher and the learner. The teacher can reduce the discrepancy by providing appropriate challenges and learning activities On the other hand, the student can reduce the discrepancy by increasing effort in using more effective strategies of learning. These measures in bringing the discrepancies must lead to answering the questions, where am I going, or feed up? How am I going, or feedback? And where to next, which is the feed forward. Limitless literature discuss the barriers to effective feedback, and I'm sure all of us can all relate to this. Examples of barriers are the absence of feedback system or the reputation of the feedback giver. Baka kilala siya as nang terrorize, no? Or the personality of the teacher. Talagang ganun siya, no? Poker face siya, no? Or the intention of giving the feedback. Again, baka naman gusto lang i-down yung learner or yung colleague, no? Or inadequate skills of teachers, especially health professions educators, are not given formal training as to how to give and receive feedback. Or the nature of the relationship. It can be a barrier because it's like the teacher-student relationship or the dean and the co-worker. That level of relationship sometimes can be a barrier, no, towards giving and receiving feedback. And sometimes even the culture or physical conditions. Let's say, for example, when you are, giving or receiving the feedback in a classroom, no, or in an office, or there's noise, no, there are a lot of distractions. These are barriers to effective feedback. Or students' fear of insults. Baka naman may trauma yung estudyante na napahiya na siya nun sa harapan ng kanyang mga kaklase. Openness to give and receive the feedback. Language is also a barrier. The psycho-emotional conditions. Baka maraming iniisip, maraming problema, maraming bagahe or baggages na dinadala, no? Or the personality of the student and the fear of damaging relationships. Ay, wag na lang kasi hindi ko na lang sasabihin kasi masasaktan ko siya or whatever. So, these are all barriers to effective feedback. May naalala pa ako, no? Naririnig ko to sa mga estudyante na kasi natakot na siya kasi yung consultant, ganito siya magsabi ng feedback, no? So, all of these can be barriers to effective feedback in medical education. And because we all encounter some, if not all, barriers to effective feedback, and because most health professions educators are not trained to give feedback, let me share with you some tips on how to give effective feedback. Some of these I read and painfully applied. Many are my own learnings from my previous encounters with people from all walks of life, and it worked for me. So I'm sharing them to you, hoping that this may help you as well. And by the way, these are generic tips or guidelines in giving feedback. These are applicable to teacher-student relationship, between or among peers, among students, student to teacher, husband to wife, or vice versa, parent to a child, and so forth and so on. First is check or purify your motives or intentions. Minsan kasi, akala natin maganda yung intention natin, pero at the back of our minds pala, meron tayong hidden agenda. So you have to check or purify your motives or your intentions. Number 2, be timely. No? Ideally, pagkatapos na nangyari ang isang learning or isang incident, we immediately give the feedback. But you also have to consider readiness of both you as the giver of the feedback and the receiver of the feedback. Baka kasi galit na galit ka pa, no? O baka naman yung bata ay takot na takot pa or yung learner ay takot na takot pa, no? So, kailangan handa kayong dalawang magbigay at tumanggap ng feedback. Then choose a neutral ground or a conducive place and avoid physical barriers. For example, no, ikaw administrator, gusto mong kausapin yung isang faculty member. Baka naman mas maganda kung neutral ground. Baka pwedeng sa faculty room o kaya sa coffee shop. Huwag sa office mo as the administrator kasi baka mamaya maging barrier siya ng effective feedback. Avoid the noise, wag kayo dun sa kantin, masyadong maingay. Na pumunta kayo sa isang lugar na tahimik para nagkakarinigan kayong dalawa. Then allocate ample time convenient to both. Hindi yung nagmamadali kasi sige na, sabihin mo na kasi pumunta pa ako sa susunod na ospital, no? Wag yun, no? You have to talagang find time to give and receive feedback. Focus on the action, not on the person, di ba? Familiar kayo dun sa sinasabi na love the person but hate the scene. Hindi mo sasabihin na, alam mo, galit na galit ako sa'yo. Hindi ka galit sa kanya, galit ka dun sa kanyang ginawa. No? Or nafu-frustrate ka dun sa kanyang ginawa. So, focus on the action and not on the person. Mention how you felt about what happened. Di ba sabi, communicate your feelings. No? Alam mo, nung nangyari ito, sabi mo sa estudyante, nalungkot ako. Masyado akong affected kasi akala ko naintindihan mo na hindi pa pala, no? So communicate your feelings. Balance the content. Sabi nga natin, isa-isa lang, mahina ang kalaban. Huwag yung isang buga lang, no? Unti-untiin mo naman, kaya nga, di ba, ideally, sabihin mo na agad, huwag mo nang ipunin ng ipunin. Kasi pag yan ay naipon at ikaw ay sumabog, you will defeat the purpose of giving the feedback. So, hindi kayang i-absorb lahat yan. No? So, isa-isa lang kasi mahina ang kalaban. Then, be specific. Allow the person to recall the incident before proceeding. Ito, nakakatulong ito. Kunyari, meron kang gustong sabihin sa estudyante or dun sa coworker mo, allow the person to recall. Kunyari, natatandaan mo ba isang araw may tinanong ako sa'yo tapos hindi mo ako pinansin? Kailan yun? Now, allow the person to recall. Bakit? Because if the person says, hindi ko maalala, there's no point going on with the feedback. Kasi hindi lang siya makikinig, sarado na siya. Kasi hindi nga niya naaalala, there's no point proceeding with the feedback. Okay, next. Remember, there should be facts or data, no mere hearsays. Hindi yung pwedeng narinig ko kay ganito, sabi ni ganyan, no? You cannot act on mere hearsays. Kailangan meron kang data. Kailangan it's either your personal experience or you have something in writing. No? Hindi mo pwedeng kausapin yung isang faculty member na ganito daw yung sinabi mo sa kanila, ganito yung narinig ko sa mga estudyante. No? You should have the data with you. Even with our students, kailangan nakita mo, naobserbahan mo sa clinic o kaya sa laboratory o kaya sa classroom, then doon ka magsimula. Okay? Kailangan meron kang data. Be realistic. Focus on what can be changed. Behaviors can be changed. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na, alam mo, galit ako sa iyo kung pagmumukha mo. Hindi na niya pwedeng palitan yung pagmumukha niya. Ganun na talaga. No? So, focus on what can be changed. On behaviors, on performance. Okay? Then, own the feedback. Don't bring a mob with you. Use I, not we. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na, alam mo, sabi namin, pinag-usapan namin. No, it's a no, no. Kailangan I. Alam mo, ganito yung experience ko sa'yo. Alam mo, sabi mo sa estudyante, alam mo, ito yung naobserbahan ko. Hindi mo pwedeng sabihin na, alam mo, ito yung naobserbahan ng ibang teacher mo sa'yo. No. Own the feedback. Don't bring a mob with you. Again, use I, not we. Next, be timely, but again, as I said, consider readiness. Then offer continuing support. Pag nasabi mo na, pero here I am, I'm willing to journey with you, I'm willing to mentor you, you offer some help or support. Kasi baka siya mismo, yung learner or yung taong kausap mo, baka hindi siya capable of coping with the feedback that you are giving. So kailangan niya ng katulong, kailangan niya ng kasama. Then end with a resolution. So next time, what can we do so that hindi na maulit ito? So sasabihin nung binibigyan mo ng feedback, Doc, siguro sa susunod kapag hindi ko naintindihan, I will ask some clarifications. Fine, no? So end with a resolution. And you can end your conversation with some gesture. Sa akin nakakatulong to because I'm a touch person, no? It's either I end the conversation with a hug, no? O kaya pat on the back. It really helps, no? And then meron akong number 16, no? Joke lang to pero totoo, no? Pwede niyong hawakan yung kamay. Bakit daw kailangan hawakan ng kamay? Well, aside from, conveying some, gesture of support, para daw hindi kanya masaktan. It's just a joke, but it's true. No? Okay. So these are just some tips, no, in giving feedback effectively. Now, if you have perfected the art of giving feedback naturally, you must also learn the art of receiving feedback to complete the whole cycle of communication. Again, these are generic tips or guidelines. They work for me and I hope no mag-work din sa inyo kaya sinishare ko sa inyo. First, listen to what the person is saying, not on what you assume he is saying or he will say. Allow the person to speak and do not interrupt. Hindi yung habang nagbibigay ng feedback yung teacher ay yung estudyante nag-iisip na kung anong isasagot. Ano kayang pangontra ko sa sinasabi niya sa kanya? O kaya yung biases natin, kaya naman niya nagsasabi ng ganyan kasi ganyan. So barrier na agad 'yon, no, to be able to receive the feedback, no? Number 2, be aware of your responses. Be aware of your body language. Hindi yung kasasabi pa lang, bigla kang tumaas ang kilay, no? Tumaas na yung boses mo, no? Avoid barriers and be attentive. Then, try to remove your biases about the giver of the feedback. Try to understand where the person is coming from. No? Ano ba ang background ng taong tong nagsasabi sa akin ng feedback na ito? And as much as possible, remove all those biases. Next, be open and receptive to new ideas. No? He might be seeing something you don't see. May mga bagay-bagay kasi na akala natin, okay tayo, alam natin, pero hindi mo nakikita, pero nakikita ng iba. Okay? Understand the message. Clarify. Repeat some key points. Sabi ko kanina, don't interrupt. Ngayon, kapag medyo patapos na siya sa pagsabi ng feedback, then you might ask or you might ask for clarifications. Do you mean it's like this? Dapat ba ganito? Anong ibig mong sabihin? No? So ask for clarifications. No? And then, reflect and decide what to do. You may accept, this choice mo yan, no? You may accept or you may not. The choice is yours. Now, if you accept it, no, tanggap mo, taus-pusong tinatanggap mo, then follow up. Set another meeting if needed. No? Pwede ba tayong magkita ulit? Pwede ba tayong mag-usap ulit? Then be appreciative. Consider it as a learning experience. Pagkatapos yung mag-usap, magpasalamat ka because it's a learning opportunity. It's it's an opportunity for you to grow. Then, of course, be sincerely grateful for the opportunity. Okay? Again, these are just some tips for you to be able to receive feedback effectively. Now, feedback, most especially because everything now is digital, everything is online, no? Feedback is also given in writing. All the guidelines of giving and receiving feedback apply even in giving written feedback. The same goes, no? The same application. However, isang babala. Sabi ko babala. Because sometimes the way we write our feedback, the emojis and emoticons we use, the font color and the size can also communicate reactions and emotions. And it may increase or decrease performance. It can motivate or demotivate. It can make or break the life of the students or the people to whom we are giving our feedback to. Have you used these sentences? Naririnig mo ba ang sarili mo? O naririnig mo bang sinasabi mo? Naririnig mo bang isinusulat mo? Have you ever tried asking yourself, if I were the receiver of this written feedback, how would I feel? When we receive, for example, a message in all caps, how do we feel? Or a note with a lot of exclamation points or question marks, or angry face, or sad face. How do we feel? Yeah? So we have to consider all of these things in giving and receiving effective feedback, be it verbal or be it written. Now, we come to the discussion of the different feedback models. A frequently used method is the feedback sandwich or the compliment sandwich model, in which the top slice of bread is a positive comment. Now, it's about what the learner has done well. The middle of the sandwich is an area for improvement, like in what areas the learner needs to improve. And the bottom slice of the bread is another positive comment to end the session on an upbeat, happy, and positive note. This method encourages trust and lessens the tension between the giver and the receiver of the feedback. This can be applicable in everyday clinical practice. However, if you use this method continuously or repeatedly, or you just use this method, it might lose its effectiveness and lacking sincerity. The person receiving our feedback will only wait for the but or however in between, no? Or in the middle of our sentences. In this case, make sure to give positive feedback on its own when the opportunity arises. Yung para bang pag sinabi mo sa estudyante mo, you know what, you really did a good job. You had a good presentation. Ang inaabangan ng estudyante, naku, ito na yung however, ito na yung but, ito na yung I suggest, or ito na yung I recommend. No? Yon. So, sometimes kapag lagi naman natin itong ginagamit, nawawala yung sincerity siguro, no? And the efficacy of the comment or the feedback to our learners and even no, to our peers in our organizations. Now, another model is called the Promoting Excellence and Reflective Learning in Simulation, or we call the PEARLS model. At this point, allow me to use debriefing and feedbacking as interrelated terms. The article Debriefing and Feedback, Two Sides of the Same Coin by Voyer, now published in 2015 in Simulation in Healthcare, the Journal of the Society for Simulation and Healthcare, posits that simulation educators are already in a great position to provide meaningful feedback to learners by virtue of a number of features that should positively influence the exchange of meaningful feedback. She further mentioned that the sociocultural and interpersonal contexts that shape feedback and debriefing interact, not only focusing on the technical aspect of the debriefing, but also on creating the conditions necessary for meaningful debriefing to take place. PEARLS is composed of 4 phases: reaction, description, analysis, and summary. To clearly illustrate, please refer to the PEARLS debriefing script on your screen. You start by setting the scene, providing a short introduction to the whole process. Then after that, you now begin eliciting their reactions by asking how they're feeling about the case or the experience. That after that, you may ask them to describe or summarize the case so that you can check common understanding. You may also ask follow-up questions like what happened next, or what things did you do for the patient. When this is done, comes analysis and discussion. In the analysis part, the teacher can facilitate learner assessment by asking questions like, what aspects of the case you think managed well, or you would want to change and why? Then the teacher can proceed to directive feedback and teaching by providing the relevant knowledge to perform the action correctly. The focused facilitation can take place by offering alternatives, the pros and the cons. Clarifications or questions may also be entertained to ensure common understanding and knowledge. And finally, the application or summary, which can be learner-guided or teacher-guided, or even both. Another model is the Pendleton model developed in 1984. It is more learner-centered, conversation-based, and identifies an action plan or goals. Reflection for action. The facilitator needs to check whether the learner wants and is ready to feedback. Then the learner gives some background about what is being assessed and states what was done well. This aims to create a safe environment first by highlighting positives, and consequently, this prevents defensiveness. The facilitator then reinforces these positives, and the learner suggests what could be improved. This is important as weaknesses are dissected to offer opportunities for reflection. The facilitator advises how this could be improved, and a mutually agreed action plan is formed. The main idea is to use open questions and give the learner the opportunity to think and reflect. What do you think went well? Why do you think, or what do you think could be done differently? What could be further improved? And how can this be achieved? Another feedback model that I really love advocating is the appreciative feedback model. This is similar with the other models. However, what is very unique about this model is its positive and future-focused tone. Its emphasis on how to be more effective and productive rather than placing blame in the past. It decreases defensiveness. It focuses on what to do rather instead on what to do, and offers hope for a better future. How to give effective or appreciative feedback? First, identify the problem, challenge, or opportunity for improvement. Then reframe the problem as a future opportunity. Then identify what has made success possible in the past. This can be concretely done by utilizing the 4 Ds of appreciative feedback model. These are data, depth of feelings, dramatic interpretation, and do. The appreciative feedback model begins with the data or facts, like what is the experience? What happened? Take note of the tips of giving feedback that I mentioned earlier. Focus on the behavior or the action. Then mention how you felt about the experience. Communicate your feelings. How did it affect you emotionally or even psychologically? Remember, feelings are feelings, and nobody can tell you that your feelings are wrong. Then bring that feeling to the level of interpretation. What does the experience or the incident mean to you? What's your reading or what's your reading of the experience? Ano ang naging dating sa'yo? Then end your feedback with a resolution. Agree on what do you want to do after the experience. For example, I already read the journal you submitted about the simulation activity that you had last week. That's the data. I was impressed and I was really happy and proud of you. Congratulations. That's the depth of feelings. This achievement means that you are taking your study seriously and conscientiously. That's the dramatic interpretation. So, would it be okay with you if you will be the team leader in our next simulation session? I think this will be a great learning opportunity for you. That's the do. Okay? Now, one feedback model to help students communicate in a meaningful way and also collaborate better is the RISE model. Reflect, inquire, suggest, elevate. Aligned with Bloom's taxonomy, this model uses prompts to assist students reflect, then build their constructive analysis through inquiry, and provide suggestions to help elevate each other's work. By prompting, students critically engage with each other on 4 different levels, thus transforming vague responses to meaningful feedback. Sample prompts are written beside each step for your reference. The last feedback model that I would like to share with you is the Gibbs reflective cycle. As earlier mentioned, feedback is also done by a learner or any person with himself or with herself. Gibbs reflective cycle is used for this purpose. The model is composed of 6 steps: description, feelings, evaluation, description, conclusion, and action plan. Analysis, rather. The fourth one is analysis. First is the description of the experience. How can you briefly, objectively, accurately, and concisely describe the experience? Second is feelings and thoughts about the experience. What are your positive and negative feelings about the experience? Third is evaluation of the experience, both good and bad. How well or how bad is your experience? Fourth is analysis to make sense of the situation, like what factors facilitated or hindered the experience. Fifth is conclusion about what you learned and what you could have done differently. You can ask the question, what alternative approaches could have been done? And the last is action plan. Are there general changes you might want or you might find appropriate? At the end of the feedback and receiving, at the end of feedback, giving and receiving process, what we health professions educators really aim at is to develop that feedback seeking behavior among our learners, not only of course, our learners, but even us, all of us, as health professions educators and administrators. Because how can we sincerely and conscientiously give feedback if we ourselves are not open to receiving feedback? Feedback seeking behavior is the conscious, deliberate effort towards determining the correctness and adequacy of our behavior to be able to attain intended goals. Its key aspects are frequency, timing, the characteristics of the target of feedback, and of course, the topic. Bock et al. In 2013 added the following facts in his article: intention and characteristics of the feedback provider, nature of the relationship between the feedback seeker and provider, and motive of the learners as well as the receivers. So, we have already discussed the importance of feedback giving and receiving in assessing the teaching learning process, as well as in improving our relationships as health professions educators. The crucial skills of a giver and receiver of feedback, the relevant feedback models that can be utilized in various feedback contexts: teacher-student, among peers, student-teacher, and self-feedback. At this point, I would like to thank you for listening. I hope that after this lecture, we all try our very best as health professions educators to become better at giving and receiving feedback. I would like to leave you with the following quote to ponder upon. Give feedback with charity. Receive feedback with humility. Giving feedback won't make you great as a person, and receiving feedback won't make you less of a person. Thank you very much.